My name is Rohini Har. I'm a research fellow at the Human Rights Center. Floods, wildfires, heat, cold, and this week, earthquakes. Mother Earth has the power to wreak havoc on our lives, even end our lives in an instant. Since New Year's, 22 people died in floods in California during our rains. More than 60 people died in the winter storms on the East Coast over the holidays. It's an estimated 26,000 people died in heat waves in Europe last year. And the death toll from the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria this week has topped 20,000. It's likely to be much, much higher. I'm an emergency medicine doctor, and while those numbers are catastrophic, dramatic by themselves, my mind sees what those deaths actually look like in the emergency room. Grim, ugly, and wrenching. And while many of these deaths are, at this stage, effectively unpreventable, many other deaths could have been or could be avoided if it wasn't for ineffective governments, lack of political will, and sometimes just plain old racism. These complex humanitarian disasters are just the canaries in the coal mine of climate change. The real disaster is much more boring and is happening even on sunny, pleasant days like today in Berkeley. And it'll take a massive, massive effort to counter both the climate change and the human injustice and take care of the earth that takes care of us, especially to end our dependence on fossil fuels. And that fight needs all angles. Researchers, like my colleagues at the Human Rights Center, who expose and study the human rights dimensions of climate justice, of climate change, and try to improve the lives of those most marginalized. Advocates, like many of you that I see more and more on the streets in protest or just making more thoughtful decisions about what you buy or don't buy. And like in the film today, litigators and young people who are willing to take the law into their hands and fight through legal avenues. So the fight needs all dimensions, but it also needs many, many people. Old people, young people, like all the children I see here, and those of us in the middle. I'm drawing so much hope from seeing all of you in the audience tonight. And with that, I'm very honored to welcome you to this film screening and panel on behalf of the Human Rights Center, where I'm lucky to work. So sit down and get comfortable, and get ready to get very uncomfortable. Please remember to turn off your phones and alerts, and make sure you're staying after the film for the panel. And to start us off, I'm excited to introduce Seva Patel, a fourth grader at Peralta Elementary in Oakland, who was inspired by the words of Greta Thunberg and other young people to fight for climate justice.
This is Our House is on Fire by Greta Thunberg. Our house is on fire. I am here to say our house is on fire. Yes, we are failing, but there is still time to turn everything around. We can still fix this. We still have everything in our own hands. But unless we recognize the overall failures of our current systems, we most probably don't stand a chance. We are facing a disaster of unspoken sufferings for enormous amounts of people. And now is not the time to speak politely or focus on what we can and cannot say. Now is the time to speak clearly. Now we all have a choice. We can create transformational action that will safeguard the future living conditions for humankind, or we can continue with our business as usual and fail. That is up to you and me. And since the climate crisis has never once been treated as a crisis, people are simply not aware of the full consequences on everyday life. People are simply not aware that there is such thing as a carbon budget and how incredibly small that remaining carbon budget is. And that needs to change today. We are now at a time in history where anyone with the insight of climate crisis must speak out in clear language no matter how uncomfortable or unprofitable that may be. The bigger your carbon footprint, the bigger your moral duty. The bigger your platform, the bigger your responsibility. Adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear that I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act as if the house is on fire, because it is.
If you can all hear me, we'll start off. So thank you so much for coming. It's emotional for me to watch that journey every time I see it, but so glad you're all here and got to watch it with us. And yeah,
Sorry, it's on.
I can get closer.
That's what I'm talking about.
So we just wanted to, I think some of our intention with this conversation, and I'd love to have questions, is to really sort of leave people with feelings of like, we can do this. And while there's a lot of sad in the film, there's actually a tremendous amount of opportunity and good news and hope and action that's happening right now. And a lot of it is happening right here on this campus. And these 3 students are really amazing examples and resources for people. So do you all want to just start by like sharing, one cool thing you're doing to address either climate crisis or work on environmental justice issues in your own lives here on campus? And
yeah, sure. I guess I can start. Hi, I'm Ashi, go by she, her pronouns. So I've been involved, I think, with decommissioning our fossil fuel infrastructure on campus for basically since I was a freshman, so about 2 years, 2.5. And it really started with us working kind of against administration. There was sort of this status quo where our cogeneration plant, which burns in like natural gas, basically fracked methane, contributes to over 80% of our campus emissions, 130,000 metric tons of CO2 a year, and is and the UC overall across all 9 campuses, this one of the largest emitters in the state of California. So just for a little bit of context, but working towards, getting administration on our side for them wanting to decommission the cogeneration plant, finding the funds to do it from the state government, just looking towards getting everyone on the same page and combining all those different perspectives. It's just been a really valuable experience. It's something I get to continue to work on. I get to celebrate the fact that we did secure our first $83 million of funding last year in June, with another additional, I think up to, it's 3 packages of 83, so $249 million in total over the next, hopefully, 3 years, which I think is pretty amazing. And
yeah, really deserves a huge hand. Yeah, like awesome example just right in your own community of decommissioning and reducing so many emissions and promoting renewable energy. So huge congratulations.
Yeah.
Amy, did you want to jump in and talk about your work?
Yeah, of course. So starting in university in the pandemic, it was really beyond difficult to get involved. And someone had come into my classroom to talk about CalPIRG, and the light was back in my face. It was so incredibly different to finally feel like I can make a difference even in a virtual format. And so I joined CalPIRG. I stayed with them for 2 years and built up a reputation with them, and eventually became or elected into vice chapter chair and leading the Plastic Free Oceans campaign. And I just learned so many incredible skills and got connected with so many people. I have worked one-on-one with the Berkeley City Council And spoiler alert, we did pass a Better Berkeley bag ban. Previously, plastic bags had been banned in Berkeley, but this ban was only a 10-cent tax, which is nothing more than a thorn in anyone's side. And so we took a bunch of measures and talked to people and talked to students. We talked to business owners, got them to sign letters and delivered them directly to the Berkeley City Council, and were listened to. Additionally, with CalPERG, I have taken trips to Sacramento to talk to our state legislature also on that was Assembly Bill 2026, addressing the amount of plastics that we see in e-commerce. So that is like all the mail that you receive and all the plastics that come in that, and combating it one-on-one with just our feet on the ground and waving to people, getting to know. So many people have this passion for environmentalism, but have absolutely no place to start. And then that did start with just a smile and a hand wave.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. And Mari?
It is intimidating to be up on a platform like this and thinking about your journey through climate advocacy. And it really started by the fact that I was really engaged in the conversation of rights of persons with disabilities. I myself am a disabled student, and working with that, I found out that there is intersection with all kinds of human rights and climate advocacy. And so I was able this summer to work at the UN, and I started doing research for them about the intersection of policy and news that come out of local communities. And so I spent my summer researching how many local communities have access to local climate coverage beyond what you read in the New York Times and Washington Post. And it is astounding to see that these communities don't have this access. And throughout Berkeley and throughout my time here, I've been able to see how privileged we are to live in a community where this is being addressed constantly, but that's not the case for the rest of the United States and the rest of the world. And so through that, I was chosen to be one of our delegates for the first UC Berkeley delegation to COP27, the UN Climate Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt this year, which was incredible and astounding. But I was one of 9 students selected to go out of a almost 400 student applicant pool in one UC in California, and we were the largest delegation from, I think, almost any school in the world of undergraduates. And that is incredibly impressive to see the amount of work that goes into this, but also the amount of interest. The people that are the most passionate are our youth, as we are seeing in these films. And the fact that I was lucky enough to be chosen is not making me representative of the youth population. I am just one of many who have had these incredible, unique, privileged opportunities. But everywhere, people really care about this issue. And I think that that's what got me into this space in the first place. The fact that I myself cared, and just watching the movie can make you emotional, because you see that it is not just us on the panel or the 21 plaintiffs in the movie, but it is hundreds and thousands and millions of youth around the world that care about these issues.
I love that point. And it's so true. I mean, I am so privileged to represent these 21 youth and then other plaintiffs that we represent at our Children's Trust. But there are millions of young people engaged in doing this kind of work that you three are doing and that our plaintiffs are doing. So with that, maybe we'll open it up for questions for anyone on the panel.
I'm remembering, I think correctly, that the first solar panels on campus were put on the Student Union building by the students. And I've wondered from time to time, I know it was renovated, are they still up there?
Does anyone know?
I am pretty sure they are still up there.
And a second question I have that's I find extremely frustrating is the very clear effort being made by public utilities, PG&E absolutely among them, against rooftop solar, driving the prices up to make it harder for ordinary people to get. And committing to giant solar plantations in fragile desert lands and places like that, which will require great big, expensive, invasive transmission lines, whereas rooftop solar has available, accessible sites all up and down the state, all over the country, all over the world. And all I can see is that it's a question of centralization of power, and the public utilities, the oil companies, the government want to control our access to power. And it seems to me it really comes down to taking back that power and figuring out a way to get rooftop solar everywhere, because that will make a difference very quickly, whereas most other modes of providing energy take a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that you don't see in the film, but that I do want to let everyone know, is I'm really fortunate to work with the top experts on the energy transition, and they are witnesses in our cases. And what's really interesting about the renewable energy transition and the land space it takes to do that, it actually takes less of our land space to power the country with wind and solar and renewable energy than the fossil fuel infrastructure that we have. So if you're worried about land space, right, like the fossil fuel infrastructure has such a greater impact even than a big solar farm. So we actually reduce the land if we transition that we're already using for fossil. So it's just something to know about. And for all the young people out there, like, the technology's there and ready. So this is not a technology issue, this is a political will issue.
Thank you so much for being here. What a privilege. It was fun when the lights went on and I was like, wait, that's the person from the documentary. So cool.
I have more gray hair now.
This was starting to be mentioned towards the end of the documentary, and it was actually interesting that one of the plaintiffs mentioned it as well. But even though the case didn't make it to trial, I would love to know what have been some of the ripple effects.
Yeah, well, and let me, here's a spoiler that you don't get to see in the film. Well, actually, the filming concluded before we got the Ninth Circuit decision, and then they tell you at the end sort of what happens, right? But the last screen is, we're not done. So the case is still going, and we are back before Judge Ann Aiken in the district court, so the trial court in Oregon. And she has before her what's called a motion to amend. And it's basically, we read the opinion of the Ninth Circuit on the part we lost, and we said, okay, we can work with that. And we reworked the complaint, which is the document you file to start a case. And we changed it a little bit to accommodate the concerns of the majority. And so she has a motion pending before her, and we're optimistic based on how the oral argument went that she's going to approve that and say, yes, we're back in the game. And then the next step again would be trial. And the only thing that could stop us is if the Biden administration and the Department of Justice under the Biden administration decides to do a 7th petition for writ of mandamus against us, which is it's a really rare legal tool. And it's happened more in the Giuliani case than in any case in US history. So that's how hard they fought us. So when we get this decision from Judge Aiken, we'll need everyone's support. And in fact, you can go on our website at ourchildrenstrust.org and sign a petition that's directed at Attorney General Garland, telling him to stand down and just go to trial. So that's what's coming next. And in terms of ripple effect, I was talking to law students earlier today about the rulings that we did win really formed the basis of a lot of other litigation, our own litigation in the United States, but also litigation around the world on behalf of youth. There are dozens and dozens of these cases, and many of them work with that foundational ruling that there is a fundamental human right to a climate system that sustains life. And so tons and tons of impact from the work that these 21 youth have done. Thanks for that question.
So I have a split question. For you, how do you prep your plaintiffs to have the stamina to endure this kind of a case? And then for the 3 undergraduates on the panel, how do you guys have the stamina to continue with your efforts despite seemingly useless government?
Yeah, so I'll just answer quickly. We do a few things. We do dance, and the youth, they are all musical and artistic. So I think they rely on those skills and coming together in community, and they are family. So we bring them together, and they come together and support one another, and just being in communities with other people who care about the climate crisis. And on my staff, we have a trauma consultant. And so we train our staff on working in a trauma-sensitive way with young people, recognizing trauma that everyone has that's not just about climate. And she does trainings with our youth too, to give them the tools to deal with resiliency in this work and just in living in general. So we do all of those things. But I'm sure you all have lots of good ideas too.
Yeah, well, I can actually get started. I had to lower my responsibilities and commitment to CalPERG. Although I owe them the absolute world for opening so many doors for me, they were having me work maybe 15 hours a week unpaid, and that was just no longer personally sustainable for me. And so I did have to depart from the organization and root myself elsewhere, where my needs were a little bit better met. But I still love CalPERG and advocate for them all the time and push students to join it if that sounds like it's the right place for them. Sustainability isn't just about global systems. An individual is a system in and of itself biologically, and our happiness matters, and we can't keep fighting the fight against climate change if we are unhappy and demotivated.
Absolutely.
I think it's also partially what we want for our futures. And that means personally, my future, your future, our futures. And that does not just include pushing forward constantly. That includes taking care of ourselves. But I think I can speak for all of us when we say that this is not just a matter of purpose, it's also a matter of passion. We are not just interested in this because we think it is the right thing to do, but a lot of these conversations are intellectually stimulating. They build us to be better students. They are topics that we are interested in. We are taking 1,000 classes on subjects that might not help us all that much in our future climate career goals, but they stimulate us and give us purpose and drive to keep learning about this. And I think a lot of us want to go into further higher education than this or work a job, and all of these are tools for further learning. And I think that further learning is something that is ultimately independently satisfying. And so as much as we fight together as a unity and coming together as a collective to fight against this bigger, larger demon of climate change and government incompetence, it is also amazing to be in this space and to be in a classroom with people who see things the same way you do and see things differently than you do. And you have this opportunity to expand your brain and expand your love and your life, and it gives you a more enriched life. And I think all of us have gained that from our climate education. I know that I came into school wanting to go into environmental law, and from my classes I changed that, but I have still remained in that subject and that major because I find it to be so wholly fulfilling compared to other education I get. And while I still want to go into law, this will inform the rest of my education and the rest of my life. And so ultimately, I think you get a well-rounded life from climate advocacy. And that's why, as much as we can get burnt out, it drives us and pushes us forward and grounds us in what we do now.
I mean, I couldn't put it better than what these two said, honestly. Just a combination of, like you said, intrinsic drive and support from your community.
Yeah, well, we're going to the next question. I had a chance to speak to these 3 amazing students earlier, and I think what I see in them is just a passion for what they're studying and what they're interested in. And I think follow your heart and your passion, and that helps a lot.
Thank you so much, first of all. That was so powerful. I've been following this case since the very beginning, and it's really amazing to see the whole arc of, well, what we've seen so far. My question is about one of the judges in the Ninth Circuit, I think Kaczynski, talked about how in the future we might have a different government, we might have a different executive, legislative branches. Maybe these aren't the right ones for right now. And I guess my question is two-pronged. In the present, we now have a new Supreme Court, and Amy Coney Barrett's father, I believe, worked for Shell. So I'm curious what you think the chances are for this case going to trial with this new Supreme Court. And on the other hand, like, what are you guys doing to influence the future legislative and executive branches? Are there any of these young people who are taking any interest in politics?
Well, one of my plaintiffs, Alex, who grew up on a farm in Roseburg, he's graduating from law school this year. So we have our first lawyer client on the case. So I'll start with the Supreme Court question. Yeah, the Supreme Court has changed a lot since we first filed the case. And even though that's the case, we have always built these cases to speak to a conservative judiciary. So for those familiar with the concept of originalism, which is where our current Supreme Court is at in terms of how they decide cases, we have originalist arguments that support our case. So I've always built it to be completely appealing to the conservatives on the bench. And so I will never say that we can't win even with the Supreme Court. But the judge who will decide whether we go to trial is Judge Ann Aiken. And as long as the Biden administration doesn't appeal, we won't get to the Supreme Court anytime soon. So we would have a trial, we would get a final decision. And then whoever is in power at that point can decide whether or not to appeal that final decision. So if we had a decision before the end of a Biden administration, for example, the Department of Justice could decide we're not going to appeal this, we're going to comply with it, right? So there's that option. But even if we did go up at some point to the Supreme Court, there's a lot of opinions by the court in the last few years that actually help our case. That might sound weird, but it's true. And the Supreme Court, it's going to keep shifting. It won't be the same court, necessarily in 2 or 3 years that it is today. So we will work with what we have, but we can't walk away from our courts.
Instead of just seeing 3 judges on the Ninth Circuit, what does it take to have the whole panel of judges? Because sometimes you get a different outcome, although I know there's some new people on the Ninth Circuit.
On the Ninth Circuit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we tried to get what's called en banc review, where you get more judges, and the majority of the judges did not vote for that when we got our decision. So about the judges that you see, so Judge Hurwitz, who wrote the majority opinion against us, he retired. And Judge Kaczynski, who was in the first Ninth Circuit argument, he had to resign his position for misconduct, which he found out about 2 days before that argument, when the Washington Post released a story. It was one of the first Me Too movement stories. And so his attitude that day in the court was interesting towards me, as you might imagine. But he's no longer on the bench. So there's been people who've moved off the bench, and there are new judges, both appointed by the Trump administration and the Biden administration. But I think if we go up to the Ninth Circuit, I think we're in a good position there. Yeah.
I'd like to squeeze in a quick question, if I may. So the Giuliani case is a federal case, as I understand it. It's our Children's Trust's federal strategy to compel the government to stop enabling climate change. But I know that you also have a number of state cases developed, and that that's a different strategy, and they're moving on different tracks right now. And I wondered if you'd talk a little more about the state cases that you are all pursuing.
Yeah, thanks, Alexi. So we always have worked at the state and federal level, and we work globally. And right now, the most exciting state case is our Montana case. So every state has its own constitution, right? And Montana's constitution, as of 50 years ago, they included a provision that protects the right to a clean and healthful environment. So that's a fundamental right in the state of Montana. And so we sued the state of Montana because their laws, their statutory laws, say that they have to promote fossil fuel development, and that when they're doing that, they can't consider climate change and the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions on climate change. So we're challenging those laws, and their whole implementation of their energy policy is unconstitutional under the state constitution. And we've gotten past the motion to dismiss. We've been up to their state Supreme Court. We've completed discovery. All the kids have been deposed in depositions like you saw. And we're going to trial on June 12th in Helena, Montana. It will be the first children's constitutional climate trial in the world, and the first constitutional climate trial ever in the United States. And it will be a 2-week trial with dozens of experts and plaintiffs testifying and government witnesses, and all the major media outlets will be covering it. So watch for it's called Held versus the state of Montana. Ricky Held is the first plaintiff in that case. So look out for that June 12th.
Yeah. So when something like that is decided, does that then create precedent that can be used in any trial, including your federal trial?
Yeah, really good question. And I love your t-shirt.
Oh,
those are our t-shirts she's wearing. Thank you for advertising. So the decision in Montana will be binding precedent in Montana, and then it's called persuasive precedent everywhere else. And I'll just tell you a quick story about how important a state ruling like that would be. So in the 1990s, the Supreme Court of Hawaii said that same-sex marriage is legal under the Constitution and needs to be protected. And that decision in the 90s really started the whole movement for marriage equality in this country. And it resulted in the US Supreme Court in a decision called Obergefell versus Hodges, saying that everyone has a right to marry. And so states and their Supreme Courts in particular, where this case will ultimately go, and we have a really good Supreme Court in Montana, they can really make a difference in terms of how the law evolves all across the country. And the US Supreme Court will look to what states are doing on these kinds of questions. So it's really important, yeah. And then Hawaii is next in September. We have a trial date for our Hawaii case.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
It's so beautiful to see just such a diverse body of femme people interested in climate justice work, and thank you for being here. I think you guys were speaking to like personal sustainability in the fight for climate justice, and I was wondering, Julia, specifically if you could, I guess I'm like weighing personal sustainability and then the urgency of the climate justice fight. Like, what would you say to young people that are thinking about going to law school to study environmental law or human rights law? Because, you know, law school is expensive. But there's also like an urgency there. Do you think that's a worthwhile investment, or, yeah. And also, I think I had one more question for the panelists. What do you think, because I'm an undergraduate student right now, I just transferred to Cal, what do you think is the best way to get, integrated into the environmental justice community, both on campus and then more broadly? Like, what are the best ways to get involved? It's beautiful to see you all. Thank you.
Okay, so law school question really quickly. It's a big decision, and I think it's just disgusting how much education costs in this country. I think the good thing is if you're going into public interest work, there's a lot of forgiveness programs out there. And so you can work for nonprofits and you can get those loans forgiven, at least, a big portion of them. And I'm hopeful that there will be more opportunities for that kind of forgiveness by, state and federal governments as well. So I hope that doesn't stop you, but I understand. I took out loans, but not nearly as much because it was a long time ago to do that. So good luck. I think it's a totally wonderful, worthwhile career if you follow your passion and you don't give in to the draw to go do corporate law, right? So stay true. Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually 2 of us on this panel, I'm not sure, but 2 of us are planning on going to law school, myself in international human rights, and I think Amy in environmental law. So very, very similar to your question. I think ultimately Berkeley is a wonderful institution because it can be a plus and a benefit, but we are a research institution. And I think Amy and myself both do URAP, which is undergraduate research apprenticeships, both at Berkeley Law. And I work specifically in the Berkeley Center for Comparative Equality and Anti-Discrimination Law with Professor David Oppenheimer, and I work a lot surrounding different types of human rights. We wrote the book on the global Me Too movement, up from systemic racism, gender equality. I worked on disability rights, and these things that introduce you to the legal sphere are really, really helpful, and things that are really new for undergraduates and something very unique about Berkeley. And I think that the opportunity to get involved in research is very, very unique and helped me dip my toes into this legal field that I don't have any experience in and that my parents don't have any experience in. But it helped teach me that this is, 1, something worthwhile, and 2, something that I really enjoy. And the opportunity that I had to just write 300 words and submit a button click has gotten me to travel all over the world learning about different human rights and climate advocacy. All of these things combined are opportunities that I've gotten from Berkeley, and you can get all over the world at pretty much any institution. But while you're here, take advantage of the opportunities that are given to you. Coming to panels like these, learning as much as you can, I think is something so unique and so something I'm so grateful for being here. And I think both of the other students can talk about how to get involved, but there's a million things on Berkeley's campus. We are a very student-led green initiative campus. I know that the Student Environmental Resource Center, if you are interested, has a million different opportunities from very, very high commitment to very, very low commitment. And whatever space you feel is right in the environmental sphere at Berkeley will be right for you.
Yeah, I'll come in with a little bit of a different perspective. I do not plan on going to law school, unfortunately, but I think I do want to go to grad school for a science, so we'll see. But in terms of getting involved, I think the biggest thing I can say is just be brave with the opportunities that you seek out. I mean, like it's already been said, there are so many opportunities out there. It can be intimidating to apply. It can be intimidating to talk to people who seem like they know a lot more than you do. So just coming in from a perspective of you are allowed to take space regardless of where you are in your learning journey is a very important lesson I think I've carried with me in my environmental journey, especially because I started out as an econ major. So looking at the other side from like less of a research perspective and more of an advocacy activist kind of perspective, I think I would say you have every right to be a part of the environmental community regardless of where you start from. And yes, CERC, the Student Environmental Resource Collective, is a great, great place to start. I currently work as part of the Eco Office, so I'm going to shamelessly plug them as well. Yeah, so many different opportunities. I think so many different groups to get involved with. I'm part of UC Green New Deal, but there's Pour Out Pepsi, there's eco community development, there's environmental education. You know, there's so many different departments that you can get involved in, and beyond like the ASUC Eco Office, which is kind of like our student government Eco Office, there are other environmental groups to get involved in, just all across the different different groups or topics in sustainability. So just, yeah, be brave and put yourself out there. If you throw enough darts at the board, eventually they'll land somewhere. That was my experience, so.
Yeah, I would say definitely take advantage of the institution that we have. Like, I know it's very tempting when we're out walking on Sproul, our main plaza, to kind of just glaze over your eyes and ignore all the student groups while you're on your way to class. But if you ever have the time, go ahead and give them a chat. Or I know office hours can be intimidating, but our professors are paid to offer us all sorts of opportunities. So really take advantage of classes and the professors as a resource, listen to them, ask them like what's going on, or go ahead and visit the main office of your major. They always have some sort of pamphlets going on where you can learn about different opportunities. And just as an extra, I work at the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment, and that is a federal work study position. So I'm actually paid to do what I'm absolutely most passionate about. Or on the other side of that coin, there is CalPERG. You can well, not apply actually. It's open to anyone at calpergstudent.org, and you can fill out their interest form. They have summer job opportunities if that's something that you're looking for. So yeah, I think my main 3 suggestions are: if you have work study, look at the work study website, talk to student groups on Sproul, and talk to professors.
And while the microphone's moving, I'm going to just put in a little pitch too. So we do have a new federal case that we're working on, and we're going to be representing youth based in California who've been affected by fires and smoke and floods and anything climate related. So if anyone knows young people who fit in that category and might want to become a plaintiff, feel free to reach out to me.
How did it feel to be in a movie?
Oh, great question. It was a little intimidating to be filmed. I was filmed a lot and asked a lot of questions with a camera pointed at me. And I don't really like being in front of the camera. So it was a little intimidating and hard to watch for the first time. And now I've seen the film many times, so I can watch myself without going, it's a little weird. I know some people like it, but I never wanted to be a movie star. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I thought so too.
Hi, I think the film was incredible, and I'm really inspired. I really admire everything that you've done for this.
Thank you.
This work. I just wanted to ask, since it was mentioned that some fossil fuel corporations pulled out of the case, how can we hold these corporations accountable for the harm that they've caused?
Yeah, so there are lawsuits against those corporations that, in fact, the city of Oakland has a case against the carbon majors, the big fossil fuel companies. And those cases are called damages cases. And so there are cities and counties and even states around our country that have filed suit, and they're trying to recover money to pay for the harm caused and what it will cost to protect communities and their cities and states from climate change and sea level rise in particular. And those cases, kind of like ours, they're slowly moving their way through the courts. And whether they ever recover any money from the fossil fuel giants remains to be seen. But it's really important work that's being done. It's raising awareness, like our litigation, and hopefully one day they will sort of get that money back and put it towards good causes. So people are doing that. We're not doing that work because my perspective on that is they should have to disgorge their profits. It is gross that their profits are causing this damage to the public and to young people. And they couldn't do it without the government's permission. And so it's why we're really focusing on government, because even the solutions that are coming next, we need to have the legal construct to protect people's rights so that we don't end up with the next mess, right? And so I think government's a really important target, and that's why we put our energy in that direction.
I have a follow-up on that. I know there's a lot of kind of legal firms or advocacy groups on the right who write kind of model legislation and get kind of states to pass it. Is there a possibility of that kind of thing? I'm thinking like the Heartbeat bill. It was sort of copied and pasted and passed in a bunch of states. Is there any way to write legislation that would sort of force governments to end subsidies, at the very least, to fossil fuel emitters and just try to get that passed through state courts? Or like the Texas case of the giving standing to individuals to sue abortion providers or anyone facilitating that. Like, can private citizens sue fossil fuel companies? Like, is there a kind of a think tank that I don't know about coming up with this stuff that could at least, even if it's a PR stunt, could at least change the kind of zeitgeist?
Yeah, on your latter point, I think there are some people thinking about how to use those kinds of laws modeled after the Texas SB 8 law for progressive purposes. But the Sabin Center, which is at Columbia Law School, they have put together a lot of model legislation and rules. They actually got a lot of lawyers from law firms around the country to come together to help draft different laws that can help resolve these issues and transition us off of fossil. So that's a good resource. I think they published a book on it too, and it's available. And then there are people working on constitutional amendments in states that don't have them to secure climate rights and the right to a healthy environment. And we're thinking about doing a bit of a children's rights amendment campaign. So maybe you'll hear more about that in coming months.
While the microphone's being handed around, I'd highly suggest that you look into the Inflation Reduction Act that happened last year. It seems to me that there's a lot more incentive to do the right thing than decentivizing the fossil fuel industry, which it's a bit of a Band-Aid like solution, but it might offer some of these answers that you were looking for.
Hi, thank you so much for coming here. This has been really incredible, and thank you to all our panelists. I was just curious if you could talk about this incredible journey that the plaintiffs have gone through. If you've noticed, this is they're really young, so I'm wondering how they've changed, and if you could talk about maybe what they're up to and their future plans are, and maybe if the other panelists haven't already talked about it, what has your journey been being an advocate, and how have you found your way and changed through these many years you've probably been doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you 21 different stories. When we all got to get together in Oregon for a bit of a camping trip last summer. So we brought, and I think we had 20 of the 21 plaintiffs together, which was really amazing for all of them. And the weirdest thing was Levi, who is the youngest plaintiff. He was 8 when we started, and he's now, I think he turned 16. And I hadn't seen him in close to 2 years, and his voice had completely changed, right? So he's growing up. He's becoming a young man. So there's that kind of growth that we see. I mean, they've really just come of age, many of them, during this journey. Some have gone off to college. Some are pursuing their music careers. Others are doing art. Alex is graduating from law school. Some are thinking about going to law school. Some want nothing to do with law school. just to be clear. And some are going more into politics. Vic, who you saw having the conversation with his dad at the end, Vic works for PowerShift and is doing climate advocacy. So they're all across the board, I think, as to what they're doing. Some are still in high school. Yeah, but they're growing up, and most of them now can vote. So it's been, transition into that world. I know Amy you have been interested in environmental issues since you were quite young.
Yeah, I have. Actually, I have a funny story. So I'm from the South Bay of Los Angeles, near like the El Segundo area, Dockweiler, Los Angeles International Airport, if anyone's familiar. And I remember I was at the beach with my cousin in El Segundo, and there was just tar on the beach. And if you don't know, the city of El Segundo is essentially owned by the Chevron company. And that day I decided that I wanted to sue Chevron. Of course, that was not quite possible for 8-year-old me, or maybe it was, but I didn't know. So that's where like my interest in environmentalism had started, and I wanted to do environmental science for many years. I was supported by the American Association of University Women in my interest in STEM, and then I shied away from it because being a woman in STEM is very, very intimidating. So I settled on political science, and then I realized I can do one heck of a lot more than I think I'm capable of, and so I took on a second major, an internship, a job, and that's exactly how I got here.
Yeah, I really resonate with that comment. It's hard being a woman in STEM, but I think unlike Amy, I started very, very recently. I kind of fell into it, so I don't even consider myself a full activist. A lot of what I feel is like just luck. It kind of fell into it by mistake. This is like a funny story I love telling, but basically I was taking a climate science class here as a breadth requirement, so not related to my major at all, ready to knock out my science requirement. And my professor was like, oh yeah, we're doing some stuff related to fossil fuel divestment. It's like open to students, email this person and show up. And so I emailed this other grad student who goes to UCSD. Her name's Monica, if anyone knows Monica Nelson. But she was like, yeah, we're actually really like, we're having a meeting to discuss, like who's going to be presenting to some UC campus administration later. You should totally hop on. I was like, okay. And this is during the COVID pandemic. I'm a freshman. I jump onto this call and I see like adults staring back at me, like faculty, campus administration. And I'm like, am I in the wrong meeting? Am I in the wrong call? And they were like, no, this is the call we're going to be presenting, or we're prepping to present to President Michael Drake, if all the UC campuses, do you want to help out? And I was like, I do not belong here. I need to leave this call. But unfortunately, I was stuck at that point, or like I was panicking behind my screen, but it all turned out for the better. So not a long way of saying, I haven't been an activist for a very long time. My environmental journey has been very relatively short, and I think it's been filled with lots of ups and downs. And I think I've just been incredibly grateful and really lucky that I got thrown into that kind of path, because it helped me kind of find a passion and purpose in my life that I didn't really know was there before. Yeah, and kind of changed the course of my entire college career. So yeah, branch out and try new things, people. You never know where it leads you.
I think that in my environmental journey, I have been faced time and time again with being in rooms I felt like I didn't belong in. I got this weird opportunity to travel to Egypt to a COP conference, and I was very unsure of what was going to happen. It was the first time Berkeley students have gone. And I went there and I was immediately overwhelmed by the fact that 30,000 people go to this event. And I am walking next to the Secretary General. And I was terrified because the UN defines youth as anyone under 30. So to the UN, I am a baby. I don't have any voice. And being in that space is so intimidating. And any Berkeley student can tell you, we all have issues with our little imposter syndrome of do I belong here? And every single person has an environmental journey. If you have been outside ever, you have an environmental journey, because everything that you do is personal. It does not have to be in marches, in advocacy. It does not have to be in a classroom. It does not have to be in the legal field. You have environmentalism intertwined with all aspects of your life. And at the end of the day, we realized that I was going to these COP conferences rather than my professors, and the knowledge I had in my head was research that they would have presented. And it's impossible not to feel intimidated by that. But what I had to present at these conferences was my own personal journey. It's similar to these plaintiffs. What they have as evidence is their lives. And everybody has that in their lives. And so when we come together and you find your environmental journey, it will be entirely your own. And that gives me the reassurance that I belong there, because no one belongs there more than I do, because I am myself. And it gave me the confidence to be able to enter these spaces and talk to negotiators and be in terrifying spaces like the UN and feel like I belonged and feel like my voice deserved to be heard as much as anyone else that was there. And so for young people in here, you can start at any age and you could end at any age, and it will be a lifelong journey.
Well said.
I think that's a pretty fabulous note to bring this evening to a close on. I just want to add that if anyone wants to get more involved, I think you can come and speak to our speakers about ways that students can get involved, or community members, or law students and legal people. And let's just have a big round of applause for these incredible folks and all the work they've done. Thank you so much, everyone.